thought it was just a desperate deal to prevent war. But when the Comanche chief asked her to be his woman for 7 sunsets, she didn't realize the real reason would touch her heart and test everything she believed about love, loyalty, and destiny. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching sun beat down on the dusty plains of Texas as Elizabeth Morgan wiped the sweat from her brow. The year was 1875, and the young schoolteacher had arrived from Boston just 3 months ago to teach at the small frontier settlement of River Cross. With her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her once pristine dress now dusted with the persistent dirt of the West, she looked nothing like the prim and proper Easterner who had stepped off the stagecoach. "Miss Morgan," called one of her students, little Sarah Jenkins, running up to her as Elizabeth locked the schoolhouse door for the day. "Pa says there's Comanche riders coming to town for trading." Elizabeth smiled gently at the girl's excitement, though her own heart quickened its pace. The relations between the settlers and the native tribes remained tense, despite the recent peace treaties. "Well then, Sarah, I'm sure your father will want you home right away." As Sarah scampered off, Elizabeth gathered her books and papers, hurrying toward her small rented room at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. The town was already buzzing with the news, men gathering on the porch of the general store, some with hands resting a bit too casually near their holstered pistols. Sheriff Thomas Miller nodded to her as she passed. "Afternoon, Miss Morgan. Best stay inside today. Chief Silverwolf and his men are coming in to trade. They've been peaceful enough lately, but no need to tempt fate." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elizabeth replied politely, though something in her bristled at the assumption that she needed protection. She had come west precisely to escape the suffocating protectiveness of Boston society after losing her parents to influenza last winter. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of them, a group of 5 Comanche warriors riding proudly into town, their faces painted, feathers adorning their long black hair. At their lead was a man whose very presence commanded attention. He sat taller than the others, his copper skin gleaming in the sunlight, his dark eyes scanning the town with a keen intelligence that belied the savage label the townsfolk were so quick to apply: Chief Silverwolf. Elizabeth had heard stories about him, how he spoke perfect English, having been educated at a mission school before returning to his people, how he fought fiercely to protect Comanche land yet sought peace when possible, how he was feared and respected in equal measure by both natives and settlers. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Elizabeth felt a strange jolt course through her body. Instead of looking away demurely as propriety demanded, she found herself unable to break his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, recognition, perhaps, of something kindred despite their vastly different worlds. The spell broke when Mrs. Abernathy called sharply from her porch, "Elizabeth, come inside this instant." That night, sleep eluded Elizabeth. The town meeting had been full of worried chatter about increased Comanche presence in the territory and rumors of white settlers going missing. Sheriff Miller had tried to maintain calm, but the undercurrent of fear was palpable. A soft tapping at her window startled her from her thoughts. Heart pounding, she cautiously approached, expecting perhaps a branch blown by the wind. Instead, she found herself staring into the intense dark eyes of Chief Silverwolf. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice deep and accented, but his English perfect. "I need to speak with you." Every rational thought told Elizabeth to scream for help. Yet something in his expression, urgency without menace, made her hesitate. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. "The children speak of their teacher with the hair like autumn leaves and eyes the color of sage," he replied. "Please, I would not ask if it were not important." Against all reason, Elizabeth slipped on her shawl and climbed through the window. In the silver moonlight, she could see his face more clearly. Strong features, a scar running along his jawline, and eyes that held both hardness and an unexpected depth of feeling. "My people face great danger," Silverwolf said without preamble. "The peace treaty is being threatened. Some of your people claim we have taken white settlers, but this is not true. Someone wishes to provoke war." "Why tell me? I'm just a schoolteacher," Elizabeth replied, confused. "Because tomorrow I must speak with the army commander who comes to your town. He will not listen to me. But if I have a white woman, a respected teacher, by my side as my woman. He might believe that I seek true peace." Elizabeth gasped. "You want me to pretend to be your woman? That's preposterous. For 7 days only, 7 sunsets. Then you return, and perhaps many lives, both Comanche and white, will be saved. You're asking me to abandon everything? My reputation, my position?" Silverwolf's expression remained stoic. "I ask much, yes, but without this, blood will flow like the rivers in spring." Elizabeth felt dizzy with the weight of his request. Why me? Why not someone else? Because when our eyes met, I saw a spirit unafraid of crossing boundaries, a heart that seeks truth, not comfort. His voice softened slightly. "And because there is another reason that I cannot yet tell you, one that concerns you directly." Before Elizabeth could demand clarification, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Silverwolf tensed. "The army scouts. I must go. Tomorrow at dawn I will wait by the creek east of town. Come if you wish to prevent war, and discover the truth that brought me to you." In a fluid motion, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elizabeth trembling with a decision that would change her life forever. Dawn broke over the eastern hills with streaks of amber and gold as Elizabeth stood at the edge of Rivercross, her small carpet bag clutched tightly in her hands. She had left a letter for Mrs. Abernathy explaining she had been called away on urgent family business. It wasn't entirely a lie. If what Silverwolf said was true, many families' lives hung in the balance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as doubt clouded her mind. Was she being incredibly naive? Foolishly romantic about an adventure? Or worse, was she being manipulated for some darker purpose? "You came." Silverwolf's voice startled her from her thoughts. He sat astride a magnificent paint horse, his expression betraying momentary surprise before returning to its usual inscrutable calm. "I'm still not certain I should have," Elizabeth admitted. "But if there's any chance I can help prevent bloodshed." Silverwolf nodded once, then extended his hand. "The journey to my village is long. We must ride together." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before allowing him to pull her up behind him on the horse. The intimacy of the position, her arms necessarily around his waist, her body pressed against his back, made her cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the rising sun. They rode in silence for hours, the landscape changing from the familiar settled lands around Rivercross to wilder, more rugged territory. Elizabeth marveled at the beauty of it. Rolling hills covered in waving grasses, stands of cottonwood trees along bubbling creeks, distant mesas rising like ancient sentinels against the vast blue sky. "Why did you really come to this territory?" Silverwolf asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question caught Elizabeth off guard. "I told you, I'm a teacher. Many towns need teachers. Why come so far from your home, to a place where danger rides with the wind?" Elizabeth found herself answering truthfully. "After my parents died, Boston felt suffocating. Everyone either pitied me or saw me as a burden to be married off. I wanted to make my own path." "So you seek freedom," Silverwolf said, not as a question but as an understanding. "Don't we all?" she countered. A low chuckle rumbled through his chest, surprising her. "Perhaps we are not so different, you and I." By late afternoon, they approached the Comanche encampment. Elizabeth felt a flutter of apprehension as dozens of eyes turned to watch their arrival. Women paused in their work, children stopped their play, and warriors stood with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Silverwolf helped her dismount, then addressed his people in their native language. Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone of authority and reassurance. An elderly woman approached, her face a map of wrinkles, yet her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She spoke rapidly to Silverwolf, occasionally glancing at Elizabeth with undisguised skepticism. "This is Singing Bird, my grandmother, and the tribe's medicine woman," Silverwolf explained. "She says you have courage, but questions your wisdom." "I'm beginning to question it myself," Elizabeth murmured. Silverwolf's mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. "Come, you will stay in my lodge. Tonight, we will explain to the council why you are here." The inside of Silverwolf's dwelling was surprisingly comfortable, with soft furs covering the ground, painted designs decorating the inner walls of the teepee, and a small central fire pit. Elizabeth noticed items that spoke of his dual nature. Traditional Comanche weapons and tools alongside a shelf of books in English. "You read Shakespeare?" she asked in surprise, noticing a worn copy of The Tempest. "Is that so difficult to believe?" There was a challenge in his voice. "No, I'm sorry. That was presumptuous of me." She flushed with embarrassment. Silver Wolf's expression softened slightly. "We must prepare for the council meeting. If we are to convince both my people and yours that you willingly came as my woman, we must appear comfortable with each other." Elizabeth swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware of the intimate implications of their arrangement. "What exactly does that entail?" "Nothing improper," he assured her quickly. "But you must not flinch from my touch. We must speak as people who share thoughts, not just words." Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Silver Wolf pushed aside the teepee entrance flap and stepped out, Elizabeth following cautiously behind him. A group of warriors had arrived, led by a tall, powerfully built man whose face was set in lines of anger. He dismounted and strode directly to Silver Wolf, speaking rapidly in Comanche, his gestures aggressive. "That is Thunder Horse, my cousin," Silver Wolf explained quietly to Elizabeth. "He believes I betray our people by seeking peace with the whites. He says I bring shame by bringing you here." The warrior, Thunder Horse, switched to accented but understandable English. "You bring this white woman to our camp when her people steal our land and kill our brothers? The army burns our villages while you talk of peace." "It is because they burn our villages that we must find another way," Silver Wolf replied calmly. "War will end with all our people dead or confined to the reservation lands." Thunder Horse spat on the ground. "Better to die fighting than live on our knees." His gaze shifted to Elizabeth, contempt evident in his eyes. "And what secrets has your white woman already carried to her people about our defenses, our numbers?" Elizabeth stepped forward, lifting her chin. "I carry no secrets, for I have none to tell. I came because your chief believes peace is possible, and so do I." Thunder Horse laughed harshly. "Peace? While they build railroads across our hunting grounds? While they break every treaty before the ink is dry?" "Not all white people are the same," she insisted, "just as not all Comanche are the same." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Thunder Horse narrowed his eyes, then turned back to Silver Wolf. "The council will decide if your plan has wisdom. Until then, watch your woman carefully, and your back." With that, he stalked away. Silver Wolf placed a protective hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "You speak bravely, but Thunder Horse is not wrong in his anger, only in how he wishes to address the wrongs done to our people." "You said there was another reason you brought me here," Elizabeth said quietly. "Something that concerns me directly." "What did you mean?" Silver Wolf's face grew grave. "That is why we must convince both the council and the army commander. Come inside. There is much I must tell you before nightfall." Inside the teepee once more, Silver Wolf stoked the small fire, its light casting dancing shadows across his face as he finally began to reveal the true reason behind his desperate plan. The fire crackled softly as Silver Wolf sat cross-legged across from Elizabeth, his face solemn in the dancing light. Outside, the sounds of the camp, children's laughter, women calling to one another, the distant notes of a flute, created a surprising sense of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the tension inside the teepee. "3 moons ago," Silver Wolf began, his deep voice measured, "a group of white settlers was attacked near the borders of our territory. 6 dead, 2 women missing. The army blames my people." "Was it the Comanche?" Elizabeth asked carefully. Silver Wolf's jaw tightened. "No, my warriors did not do this thing, but the tracks were made to look like Comanche. Someone wants war between our peoples. Who would want such a thing? There are those who profit from conflict. Gun traders, land speculators waiting for the army to drive us further west so they can claim more territory." His dark eyes fixed on hers. "But that is not why I brought you here. One of the missing women. Her description matches someone you know." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Who?" "A woman with hair the color of sunset. The settlers called her Miss Charlotte Willoughby." The name hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. "Charlotte? My cousin Charlotte? That's impossible. She's in San Francisco with her husband." "Are you certain?" When did you last receive word from her? Elizabeth's mind raced. The last letter had come. When? 6 months ago. Charlotte had written about her husband's business prospects in California, but then the letters had stopped. Elizabeth had assumed they were simply busy with their new life. I don't understand, she whispered. If Charlotte was here in this territory, why wouldn't she have contacted me? That is what we must discover, Silverwolf replied. The other missing woman was found dead 2 weeks ago, but your cousin may still live. My scouts have heard rumors of white women being held at an abandoned mining camp 3 days' ride from here. We must go to her immediately, Elizabeth exclaimed, half rising. Silverwolf placed a restraining hand on her arm. We cannot. Not yet. The camp is guarded by men who are neither Comanche nor regular army. And if we are to save your cousin, we need help that only the army commander can provide. But he will only give it if he believes the Comanche are not responsible for the attacks. So that's why you need me, Elizabeth whispered, the pieces falling into place. To convince him that you're trustworthy. Silverwolf nodded. If he sees that a respected white woman has willingly joined with me, it may open his mind to other possibilities. But why didn't you just tell me about Charlotte from the beginning? Would you have believed me? He countered. Or would you have thought it a trick to lure you away from your town? Elizabeth had no answer, for she knew he was right. She would have dismissed his story as a fabrication, perhaps even reported him to the sheriff. The council meeting begins soon, Silverwolf said, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. If we are to convince my people, we must appear, as I said, as a man and woman who have chosen each other. He reached down, offering his hand to help her up. When Elizabeth took it, she was surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and warfare. Standing, she found herself closer to him than propriety would allow back in Rivercross. Close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, to notice the small scar near his temple, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. How did you get this? She asked softly, her finger hovering near but not touching the scar on his jawline she had noticed the night before. Something flickered in Silverwolf's eyes, surprise at her interest, perhaps. A cavalry saber. I was 16, my first battle against the Bluecoats. And this one? Her gaze moved to the smaller mark near his temple. My first horse, he said, and a genuine smile briefly transformed his face. She was wild-spirited and threw me against a rock. I learned respect that day. The intimacy of the moment was broken by a call from outside. Silverwolf stepped back, his expression returning to its usual guarded state. It is time. The council was held in a large central teepee, where the elders of the tribe sat in a circle around a fire pit. Elizabeth felt acutely self-conscious as she entered at Silverwolf's side, aware of the critical gazes assessing her every movement. To her surprise, Silverwolf took her hand as they took their places in the circle, his warm fingers interlacing with hers, in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. It was for show, she reminded herself, even as her heart quickened at his touch. The discussion was conducted mostly in Comanche, with Silverwolf occasionally translating in hushed tones for her benefit. The debate was heated, with Thunderhorse leading the opposition to Silverwolf's plan. Finally, the elderly medicine woman, Singing Bird, spoke at length, her weathered hands moving expressively as she addressed the council. When she finished, a silence fell over the gathering. What did she say? Elizabeth whispered. Silverwolf's expression was unreadable. She said that she has dreamed of a woman with hair like fire who stands between two worlds during a time of blood. She believes you may be this woman. Before Elizabeth could process this information, Silverwolf addressed the council in English, clearly intending for her to understand fully. Tomorrow, when we meet with Colonel Richardson, I will propose a joint force, Comanche scouts and army soldiers, to investigate the mining camp and rescue any captives. If we succeed, we prove to both our peoples that we can work together. Thunderhorse rose to his feet. And if it is a trap, if you lead our warriors into the white man's guns, then I will be the first to die, Silverwolf replied calmly. As chief, that is my burden to bear. The council eventually dispersed without a clear consensus, though Silverwolf explained that Singing Bird's support would sway many who remained uncertain. As they walked back to Silver Wolf's teepee through the starlit camp, Elizabeth felt the weight of what tomorrow might bring. What if the colonel refuses to work with you? What if Charlotte isn't at the mining camp? What if... Silver Wolf stopped, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was surprisingly gentle. One step follows another, like tracks in the sand. We cannot see the end of the journey from here. How can you remain so calm when so much is at stake? She asked. Because fear clouds judgment, and clear judgment is what will save your cousin and my people. He hesitated, then added more softly, and because I am not alone in carrying this burden now. That night, as Elizabeth lay on her side of the teepee, separated from Silver Wolf by a respectful distance, she found herself studying his profile in the dying firelight. This man, so different from anyone she had ever known, carried the future of his people on his shoulders, while also reaching across a divide few dared to cross. "Silver Wolf," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. "What is your true name? The one your mother gave you?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his deep voice came softly through the darkness. "Taabe. It means son." "Taabe," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It suited him, she thought. Bright, essential, life-giving, yet capable of burning. "Sleep now, Elizabeth," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Tomorrow's path will be difficult to walk. As she drifted toward sleep, Elizabeth realized that somewhere between Rivercross and this Comanche camp, her fear of this man had transformed into something far more complicated, and potentially much more dangerous to her heart. Morning arrived with a sense of expectation hanging over the camp like storm clouds on the horizon. Elizabeth emerged from Silver Wolf's teepee to find the Comanche preparing for the meeting with Colonel Richardson. Warriors painted their faces with traditional symbols, yet they also wore their finest clothing, a blend of native garments and items acquired through trade with white settlers. Silver Wolf himself wore buckskin leggings and a fringed shirt, but over this he draped a formal army jacket, taken, he explained, from a cavalry officer in exchange for his life years ago. The contrast was striking, a visual representation of the bridge he was attempting to build between two worlds. "The colonel approaches," a young scout announced, riding into camp at a gallop. 10 soldiers with him. Silver Wolf turned to Elizabeth, his expression grave. "Remember what we discussed. You must appear as a woman who has chosen to be here of her own free will. I am here of my own free will," she reminded him. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "Yes, you are." Colonel Richardson was a square-jawed man with a mustache as precisely trimmed as his military bearing. His eyes widened in undisguised shock when he saw Elizabeth standing beside Silver Wolf. "Miss Morgan? Good God, woman, are you being held against your will?" His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Before Elizabeth could respond, Silver Wolf placed his hand gently at the small of her back, a gesture both protective and intimately possessive. "Colonel Richardson, I welcome you to our camp as our ancestors welcomed strangers, with open hands and watchful eyes." The colonel's gaze shifted between them, suspicion evident. "I received your message claiming you have information about the settler attacks. I'm here to listen, but understand this. If those missing women aren't found, the army will hold your people responsible. That is why we must speak," Silver Wolf replied calmly. "Not as enemies, but as men who both seek justice." Elizabeth stepped forward. "Colonel, I'm here because I choose to be. Chief Silver Wolf has evidence that the Comanche are not responsible for the attacks, and information about where the missing women might be found. And you expect me to believe that you've willingly—" Richardson's voice trailed off, his distaste evident as his eyes moved between Elizabeth and Silver Wolf. "Chosen to be with a man of honor and courage?" Elizabeth finished for him, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, Colonel, that is precisely what I've done." She felt Silver Wolf's hand tighten slightly at her waist, though his expression remained impassive. The negotiations that followed were tense, with Thunder Horse and his supporters watching with open hostility as Silver Wolf proposed the joint rescue mission. Elizabeth provided what little she knew of her cousin Charlotte, confirming her identity through a small daguerreotype she kept in her locket. "This mining camp," Colonel Richardson said skeptically. Who do you believe is holding these women, if not the Comanche? Renegades, Silverwolf replied. Men who profit from conflict between our peoples. My scouts report they are led by a white man with a scarred face. A shadow passed over the colonel's features. Scarred how? A burn across the right side. He wears his hat low to hide it. Richardson's jaw tightened. Jebediah Hayes. Dishonorable discharge 2 years ago. He was trading weapons to hostile tribes. Or so we thought. If he's behind this, then we have a common enemy. Silverwolf finished. By midday, an uneasy alliance had been formed. Colonel Richardson would return with a dozen of his best men the following morning. They would ride with Silverwolf and 10 Comanche warriors to the abandoned mining camp. As the colonel prepared to leave, he took Elizabeth aside. Miss Morgan, speak truthfully now. Are you here by choice or coercion? Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. I am here because I believe in what Silverwolf is trying to accomplish, Colonel. And because my cousin's life may depend on it. Richardson studied her for a long moment. Very well. But I'll have an extra horse ready tomorrow, should you change your mind. That evening, the camp hummed with preparation. Warriors checked weapons and readied horses, while women prepared medicines and provisions for the journey. Elizabeth helped where she could, grateful when Singing Bird beckoned her to assist with grinding herbs for poultices. You have strong hands, the old woman commented in surprisingly good English. Strong heart, too. I'm afraid, Elizabeth admitted. For Charlotte, for what might happen tomorrow. Singing Bird nodded, her ancient eyes knowing. Fear is the shadow cast by courage. Without one cannot have other. She paused in her work, fixing Elizabeth with a penetrating gaze. My grandson watches you when he thinks no one sees. Your grandson, Silverwolf, son of my daughter who walks with spirits now. Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks. He brought me here to help save my cousin and prevent war. Nothing more. Singing Bird made a sound that might have been skepticism or amusement. The heart knows truths the head denies. She pressed a small leather pouch into Elizabeth's hands. For protection tomorrow. Wear against skin. Later, as darkness fell and the camp grew quiet, Elizabeth found Silverwolf standing alone at the edge of the encampment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Are you troubled? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Tomorrow brings many possibilities, he replied. Some good, some... He didn't finish the thought. You're worried about Thunderhorse, Elizabeth guessed. He seemed angry when the colonel left. Silverwolf sighed, a rare display of weariness. My cousin believes I betray our people by working with the army. He does not understand that sometimes we must bend like the willow to survive the storm. And if Charlotte isn't at the mining camp, if this plan fails, then the consequences will fall most heavily on me. His eyes, when they met hers, held resignation. And on you, for trusting me. Without thinking, Elizabeth reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. I do trust you, Taabe. The use of his true name seemed to startle him. For a heartbeat, the careful control he maintained slipped, and Elizabeth caught a glimpse of the man beneath the chief's stoic mask, vulnerable, burdened by responsibility, and profoundly alone. His hand rose, hesitantly, to touch her cheek. Why? Because you risked everything to save a woman you've never met, simply because she matters to me, she whispered. Because you fight for peace when it would be easier to choose war. Because when you look at me, you see Elizabeth, not just a white woman. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the night air charged with unspoken feelings. Elizabeth found herself acutely aware of his closeness, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips, of the way his eyes reflected the starlight above. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Elizabeth found herself responding with a fervor that surprised them both, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. Elizabeth, he murmured against her lips, her name a prayer and a question all at once. Before she could respond, a commotion in the camp shattered the moment. They turned to see a rider galloping into the clearing, his horse lathered with exertion. Scout returns, Silverwolf said, immediately alert. Something is wrong. The news was grim. The mining camp had been abandoned, signs indicating a hasty departure mere hours before. But more troubling, Colonel Richardson's patrol had been spotted heading there directly, without waiting for the Comanche warriors as agreed. "He betrayed us," Thunderhorse spat when the camp gathered to hear the news. "As I warned. Or he seeks to claim the glory of the rescue for himself," another warrior suggested. Silver Wolf's expression was unreadable. "Whatever his reason, we ride now. If Hayes and his men are moving the captives, we must find their trail before it grows cold." The night journey was grueling, a hard ride across rugged terrain guided only by starlight and the tracking skills of the Comanche scouts. Elizabeth rode beside Silver Wolf, her body aching but her resolve firm. Somewhere ahead, Charlotte might be fighting for her life, if she still lived at all. They reached the abandoned mining camp at dawn, finding evidence of the army's presence but no sign of soldiers, captives, or renegades. The camp had been cleared out completely. "Tracks lead north," one scout reported. "Many horses, women's footprints among them." Silver Wolf's face hardened. "Hayes is heading for the border. Once there, he can sell the women to Mexican traders." "And Richardson?" Elizabeth asked. "His tracks follow Hayes, but ours behind." They rode without rest, following the trail through a narrow canyon and into a valley where the earth was scorched black by a recent fire. And there, in a clearing beside a dried riverbed, they found the army patrol, or what remained of it. The soldiers lay where they had fallen, victims of an ambush. Colonel Richardson himself was propped against a boulder, gravely wounded but still clinging to life. "Trap," he gasped when Silver Wolf knelt beside him. Hayes knew, was waiting. "Women are still with them, 5 miles north, river crossing." "Why did you not wait for us as agreed?" Silver Wolf asked, as Elizabeth tore strips from her petticoat to bind the colonel's wounds. "Orders, from Fort Davis. Capture Hayes. Didn't trust." His eyes fixed on Elizabeth. "Sorry, ma'am, your cousin asked for you before they took her." Hope surged through Elizabeth. "She's alive? You saw her?" Richardson nodded weakly. "Alive. Fighting spirit. Like you." Silver Wolf rose, his decision made. "We continue north now." "The soldiers?" Thunderhorse questioned. "2 warriors stay with wounded. Rest ride with me." Silver Wolf's eyes met Elizabeth's. "You should remain here." "No," she said firmly. "I've come this far. I won't turn back now." They found Hayes and his men at the river crossing just as Richardson had said. The renegades had paused to water their horses, clearly believing they had eliminated any pursuit with their ambush of the army patrol. From their vantage point on a rocky outcrop, Elizabeth could see 2 women among the group, their hands bound, guarded by armed men. One had hair the color of sunset, Charlotte. Silver Wolf's plan was simple but dangerous. The warriors would create a diversion from the east while he and Elizabeth approached from the west to free the captives during the confusion. "Stay close to me," he instructed her, his hand briefly squeezing hers. "Whatever happens." The attack was swift and ferocious. Thunderhorse led the warriors in a mounted charge, war cries splitting the air as they fired rifles and arrows into the renegade camp. Hayes and his men scrambled for cover, returning fire as they tried to mount a defense. In the chaos, Silver Wolf and Elizabeth made their way to the captives. Charlotte's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw her cousin. "Elizabeth? How?" "Later," Elizabeth whispered, working to untie her bonds. "Can you run?" Charlotte nodded, helping Elizabeth free the other woman, a young mother whose infant had been killed in the initial attack on the settlers. The escape nearly succeeded. They were halfway to the horses Silver Wolf had tethered in a stand of cottonwoods when a shot rang out. Elizabeth turned to see Hayes himself, his scarred face contorted with rage, aiming a rifle directly at Silver Wolf. "No!" The scream tore from her throat as she threw herself forward, pushing Silver Wolf aside just as the rifle cracked. Pain blazed across her upper arm, a graze, not a direct hit. Silver Wolf spun around, his knife finding its mark in Hayes' chest with deadly accuracy. The journey back to the Comanche camp was a blur of pain and exhaustion for Elizabeth. Charlotte rode beside her, their hands occasionally reaching out to touch, to reassure each other of their presence. Silver Wolf led the party, his face set in lines of determination despite the wound he had sustained during the final moments of the battle. 3 days later, Elizabeth sat outside Silver Wolf's teepee, her arm bandaged but healing well. The Army reinforcements from Fort Davis had arrived that morning to collect Colonel Richardson and the other wounded soldiers. They had also taken custody of the surviving renegades, with promises that Hayes's network of criminals would be dismantled. Charlotte approached, sitting beside her cousin on the buffalo robe. "The soldiers are ready to leave. They expect us to go with them." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "And will you?" "I have no choice. My husband is waiting in Santa Fe. They've sent word to him." Charlotte studied her cousin's face. "But you have a choice, don't you?" Before Elizabeth could respond, Silver Wolf emerged from a council meeting. The past days had revealed a different side of him to his people. Not just a leader seeking peace, but a warrior capable of decisive action when needed. Even Thunder Horse had clasped his forearm in newfound respect. "The Army commander wishes to speak with you," he told Elizabeth, helping her to her feet. His touch lingered longer than necessary, his eyes conveying what remained unspoken between them. The new commander, a Major Daniels, was more diplomatic than Richardson had been. "Miss Morgan, the Army owes you and Chief Silverwolf a debt of gratitude. Hayes has been operating with impunity for years. Thanks to your actions, that ends today." "And the peace treaty?" she asked. "Will be honored," he assured her. "I've recommended that Chief Silverwolf be recognized as the official liaison between the Army and the Comanche people." He glanced between Elizabeth and the chief, something knowing in his expression. "We're leaving within the hour. Will you be joining us?" Elizabeth felt Silver Wolf go still beside her, though his face betrayed nothing. 7 days had passed since he had appeared at her window. 7 sunsets, as he had promised. She was free to return to River Cross, to her teaching, to the life she had built. Yet as she looked around the camp, at Singing Bird who had tended her wound, at the children who had begun to approach her without fear, at the vast open landscape that had come to represent not danger but possibility, she knew her answer. "No," she said simply. "My place is here now." Later, as the Army patrol disappeared into the distance, Charlotte among them carrying letters for River Cross, Silverwolf found Elizabeth by the creek where the women gathered to wash clothing. "7 sunsets have passed," he said quietly. "You are no longer bound by our agreement." Elizabeth rose to face him, her heart suddenly racing. "Is that all it was to you? An agreement?" Something vulnerable flickered in his dark eyes. "You know it became more. Then ask me to stay, Tabe. Not as part of an arrangement, not as a symbol of peace between our peoples. Ask me to stay for you." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "The path between our worlds will not be easy to walk." "I didn't come west seeking easy paths," she reminded him. "I came seeking a life of my own choosing." His smile, rare and transformative, broke across his face like sunrise over the plains. "Then choose me, Elizabeth Morgan, as I have already chosen you. Stay not for 7 days, but for all the days the sun rises." As their lips met in the golden light of the 7th sunset, Elizabeth knew she had found what she had truly been seeking since leaving Boston. Not just freedom from constraint, but the freedom to love beyond boundaries, to build something new in this wild and beautiful land, with this extraordinary man who had crossed impossible divides to find her. And as the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, Silverwolf whispered against her hair, "Now we begin our true story.